LeBron James passes Kareem for most points all time in a career by an NBA player. And Kevin Durant might ask for a trade this offseason. We're going to get into those two topics, plus a little bit more on this episode of Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast. Without further ado, let's get into it. I want to first thank each and every one of you for watching this episode of Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast. Your support means the world to me, and the continued support of the podcast and all the other platforms we run it on has really meant a lot. You can find us on other platforms. You can find us on Instagram at Lots of Thoughts Sports, on TikTok at Lots of Thoughts Sports, on YouTube at Lots of Thoughts Sports, on Twitter at LOT Sports Pod. You can visit our website, lotsofthoughts.godaddysites.com. There you can access the podcast, the newsletter, the YouTube, the Instagram, the TikTok, the Twitter, the Facebook, the LinkedIn, the merchandise, hosted by Amazon, all over on the website, lotsofthoughts.godaddysites.com. If you're listening on a podcast platform, rate us 5 stars. If you're watching on YouTube, click the subscribe button down below and give us a like if you enjoyed this episode of NBA Conversation. Really helps us out, really helps out the algorithm and suggests the YouTube video to a whole new audience. First, I'm going to talk about LeBron. I'm recording this really while the game is still going on versus Oklahoma City tonight. So that would be early morning, February 8th, but late night, February 7th. And LeBron has just passed Kareem Abdul-Jabbar for most points by a single player in NBA history in their career. And that number that I should have had memorized off the top of my head was 38,387. Monumental achievement. And, you know, LeBron is one of the 2 greatest players of all time, in my opinion, and a lot of basketball fans' opinions, maybe not your own, but, it's each their own opinion. But to me, it goes Michael Jordan and then LeBron James. And he's right there. He's right behind Jordan. And a lot of people would have him, top 5 at the very lowest. But what LeBron has done in his career, I think that differentiates him from the other stars that are up there in this level is his longevity of his career, simply put. And I think of it like there's an easy comparison over to football, if you will. Follow me along this path. LeBron James may not have been as talented as Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan was a wizard with the basketball, an incredible player, an impact player on both sides of the court, could do things that didn't look human with the basketball, right? Unbelievable control. And I don't think LeBron has that, but LeBron probably a little bit better of a shooter. If we looked at career percentages, I'm not so sure about that, but I think in today's day and age, maybe that helped him a little bit with the way the game is played nowadays, but a comparable shooter nonetheless. A guy who's versatile, able to play all 5 positions, and has played regular minutes at all 5 positions in his career, outside of shooting guard, but he could play it, and he has played minutes there. And he's done it for significantly longer. Doesn't have as many rings as Jordan. Jordan was the all-time winner, right? 6 career rings. Of course, other players have many more, but including Bill Russell. But in terms of, these 2, Jordan certainly has more. And LeBron still ended up with 4. Could end up with more, throughout his career. But I think the comparison over to football that I mentioned is simply put by Tom Brady versus Patrick Mahomes in the same way. And it's whether you believe sustained long-term success is more important than raw natural talent and dominance for a period of time. And I think that's a fair equivalent, right? Michael Jordan was at his peak a better basketball player than LeBron James. And that's what I'd argue, even as a guy who really likes watching LeBron, is a fan of LeBron James and his game. Michael Jordan's peak was higher. But LeBron did it for significantly longer, right? We're here in season number 20 of LeBron James at age 38 years old. He's been an all-star every year but his rookie year when he was 19. He's 38, still going strong, averaging 27 a game throughout his whole career. And so he's had a significantly longer run at success. And the same thing, or a similar thing, could be said to Tom Brady. I think Patrick Mahomes right now is a better football player, more talented football player than Tom Brady ever was. The ability to scramble, ability to throw a deep ball better than Brady. He may not be as accurate in the short game. Statistically, they're pretty comparable, but he has a whole nother level of talent that he could get to that I don't think Brady could, because he was a pocket quarterback. That's just the nature of the way he played the game. And even though Patrick Mahomes may be more talented right now than Brady was. Brady did it for so long to the age of 45, won so many titles, and that's where it's not too comparable because Jordan had the edge of titles over LeBron, and Brady is not getting passed in titles by Mahomes. You could put a sure bet on that. So that part's not too comparable, but the peak talent versus long-term sustained success, I think, is an interesting one to talk about in a greatest of all time debate. And I think we're going to look 15 years down the road and have these debates between Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady like we're having now between LeBron and Michael Jordan. But nonetheless, an incredible accomplishment by LeBron. There's a lot of talk about whether he'd do a sky hook to, seal the record over Kareem. There's a lot of talk that he would wait until the game between the Bucks and the Lakers because those are Kareem's two teams. But he ended up doing a step back floater, basically his career defining shot. And, what a moment for him and his family to stop the game. It was an incredible accomplishment. The one thing that I thought was funny, and I don't know if fans, you have to be a fan of baseball also for this to resonate, and probably of the Yankees for this to resonate. But last year when Aaron Judge was chasing the AL home run record, the current holder was Roger Maris, and who's obviously passed away. I'm sorry, he might be in the hospital, but he is not physically able to go out. I should probably know this off the top of my head, so forgive me that I don't. Yes, he is still alive, but he's not. Oh no, I'm sorry. He passed away in 1985. Wikipedia lied to me. So Roger Maris had passed away, and so his son, Roger Maris Jr., was kind of traveling around with the Yankees to watch this record be broken. And every time Aaron Judge came out to bat, they flipped the camera to Roger Maris Jr. And props to him because Aaron Judge went on a cold streak toward the end of the year, and Maris followed him around for a long time. Followed the Yankees around from game to game in different countries, different cities, different states, different coasts to see that home run. That's what it reminded me of tonight when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was on the sideline. Every time they showed LeBron getting a bucket, they immediately panned the camera to Kareem. And, it's got to be bittersweet for those guys to have their record, or in the case of Roger Maris, his dad's record broken. But nonetheless, it had to be, a bit bittersweet to witness both situations where the players that broke the record are incredibly great people, incredibly great members of the community. And so, and representatives of the teams that those guys played for, right? Roger Maris was a Yankee, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was a Laker. So, it's all kind of poetic in a way, but congratulations to LeBron for this amazing accomplishment. And now on to the Nets. We've talked about the Nets a lot recently, but, the Nets, Brooklyn always gives us a lot to talk about. And I'm a Nets fan, so I like to talk about it. I want to kind of address two topics. One, there's a narrative going around that this is the greatest failure of all time in professional sports. And I want to address, is that the truth? And two, I want to address whether it makes sense for KD to request a trade this summer. I don't think he's getting traded by the trade deadline. And maybe by the time I publish this, he is traded because I'm, like I mentioned, recording this probably a day before I release it. But I don't think he's getting moved even if he asked out. So whether he's getting traded in the offseason is the topic of conversation. I want to go through the timeline to accurately assess, basically from when the clean sweep happened. The Nets signed KD, Kyrie, DeAndre Jordan. Ironic. And until now. And that'll allow us to accurately assess what the team has gone through and whether it's a failure or not. So summer of 2019, KD, Kyrie, DeAndre Jordan, Woj bomb, signed with the Nets. KD was injured from the finals with the Golden State Warriors. He got hurt against the Raptors, tore his Achilles, and no one really knew if he would come back the same, right? This was a risk by the Nets because they were going to have to pay him a year to rehab, and then hopefully he'd be good for the next 3 years of that contract. So he rehabs all of the 2019-2020 season, which was interrupted by COVID and moved at the bubble. But nonetheless, Kyrie and KD started the 2020-2021 season together. And Kyrie was healthy for the first part of the 2019 season, but ended up getting shoulder surgery later on, missing a large part of that year. So they start 2021, or I guess 2020 to 2021 season together. And they trade for Harden. The Nets trade for Harden just a few months later. Not very long in the future. And that full trade, I think, is oftentimes manipulated for the media benefit, for stoking up the idea that this is a grand failure. So I have it right here, the full details via Shams Charania from The Athletic. The Rockets received Victor Oladipo from the Pacers. Dante Exum, I believe, also from the Pacers. Rodion Kurucs from the Nets. 3 Brooklyn first rounders. 1 Milwaukee first rounder from Brooklyn. 4 Brooklyn first round swaps. The Nets received James Harden. The Pacers received Karis LeVert from the Nets, along with the second rounder from the Cavs. And the Cavs received Jared Allen and Taurean Prince from the Nets. So to summarize, the Nets gave up Karis LeVert, 1 year of Jared Allen, Taurean Prince, and 3 first rounders. I realize now the Nets gave up the second. Cleveland gave up the Milwaukee first. And that's why they got Jared Allen out of the deal. So let me rephrase that. The Nets gave up 3 of their first rounders, 4 swaps, Rodion Kurucs, Karis LeVert, Taurean Prince, 1 year of Jared Allen, and a second rounder. Cavs, I think, made out the best in the deal, honestly, because they got Jared Allen and Taurean Prince, only had to give up 1 first rounder. Taurean Prince's contract wasn't the best, but that's besides the point. Of course, the Rockets made out with 4 first rounders, 4 swaps, a bunch of salary filler, Victor Oladipo, who they eventually cut, and they gave up James Harden. And the Pacers got Karis LeVert in a second rounder for giving up Victor Oladipo and Dante Exum. They're very little involved there, but it's for salary purposes mostly. So to summarize, Brooklyn gave up 3 firsts, a second, 4 swaps. Those are the picks. And then some promising young players. So they go through, 2021 playoffs happens, right? Nets face the Bucks. Well, first they faced the Celtics. Eliminate them in 5 games. Really should have been 4. On fire. The big 3, playing with guys like Blake Griffin and Jeff Green and Bruce Brown and Joe Harris. Elite offense. And then they play the Bucks. Game 1, Harden strains his hamstring. Kyrie sprained his ankle by stepping on Giannis's foot when Giannis came flying in for a rebound. KD was 1 inch away from tying the game. Winning the game in Game 7. Instead tied it. They went to overtime. They lost to the Bucks in Game 7. And the Harden hamstring, I think, looms large because the way Harden got traded was he got heavy in Houston. That was the point. He gained 20 pounds, roughly, people estimate, to be traded from the Rockets because he didn't want to be there. And he gave 2 teams that he wanted to go to, Philly or Brooklyn. Brooklyn beat the Philly package. Plus, Rockets didn't want to deal him to Daryl Morey in Philly, who was the former GM of the Rockets. It cost the Rockets a damn lot of money because he had some dumb comments to say about China. And China was a big viewing market for James Harden. They still are, but under censorship now. And so after Morey said something when he was the GM of the Rockets, then China blocked all the Rockets games, and Houston lost a lot of money and eventually let Morey go. Well, because Harden was a little bit heavy, that strained hamstring was worse off. And they went into the offseason. Harden was unable to work out because he was rehabbing. So he was heavy when he came in the next year. And you see picture comparisons. He was heavy. So they come into the 2021-2022 season. There's the Kyrie vaccination situation where City of New York doesn't allow employees of private businesses to enter a building for the business without being vaccinated for COVID-19. And so Kyrie's not allowed to play home games. He's allowed to play away games that are not in the state of New York. Although he was still allowed to play at Madison Square Garden, which is in Manhattan, but that's besides the point. We're not going to go into civil law and other conversations about that. But he was unable to play a lot of the games, and the Nets said, sorry, we're just not letting you play at all until you figure this out. And eventually they had to bring him in because Durant got hurt and Harden wasn't quite the same because he was still heavy, still rusty, and still playing his way back from that hamstring strain. And so they brought Kyrie back for the away games. Harden's getting pissed off. He gave up. Harden gave up. And maybe he thought Kyrie was a crackpot. Maybe he thought Kyrie wasn't all in. Maybe he thought he wasn't getting what he bargained for in Brooklyn. But he gave up. He had a notable poor performance, 4 points against Sacramento, and he was traded. And I have the details of that trade too. One that didn't fare well for the Nets in the long term. But the Nets, a much less complicated trade than the first one, gave up James Harden and Paul Millsap. Half a season of James Harden, by the way, and Paul Millsap. And they got Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, a half a season of Andre Drummond, a 2022 first-round pick, and a 2027 first-round pick. Of course, Ben Simmons never came back healthy for the rest of that year. Eventually, the vaccine mandate was lifted and Kyrie could play, but they got swept by the Celtics. And I want one thing to be known. The Celtics series was seen as embarrassing. Nets were the 7th seed. They got out of the play-in game. Celtics were the 2nd seed. Really resurgent Celtics team under head coach Ime Udoka, who ended up getting suspended, by the way. Just let's remember that point. That series was very, very, very close. It was one of the closest sweeps in years. In fact, it was closer than the 6-game series between the Raptors and the 76ers in the same round. This was a close series that the games just didn't go the Nets' way. But Durant could never get going. Kyrie had 1 good game and 3 bad ones, and the Nets were eliminated. Then the 2022 offseason happened. There's a lot of disgruntled situations. Ben Simmons never came back. He had surgery. His rehab was progressing. But Kyrie didn't want to come back because the Nets weren't fully keen on giving him a max contract. And I don't blame them necessarily because he hadn't been available, whether it be due to injury or missing time because of the vaccine or various other things like going AWOL in the first year with Harden. There was a lot of situations where Kyrie wasn't there when the Nets needed him to be. So they didn't want to give him a full max. Kyrie wanted a full max. And so Kyrie, being a restricted free agent, went to go get other offers to see if the Nets would match. And there was no offers available that were comparable to the 1-year option. So he comes back and takes the team option, clearly disgruntled. And then a few days later, Durant asked for a trade. And, something a little bit personal about this is when Durant asked for the trade, as a Nets fan, I was actually back home in California. And I remember I was at work. I was doing an internship. And I got the notification. I had my Twitter notifications on for Shams Charania from The Athletic. And I missed the first tweet that said Kevin Durant has asked for a trade. And I got the notification that says, the Nets will work with him to find a trade partner that suits both sides. And I'm like, oh, I wonder who this could be. Wonder who the Nets are trading. I'm thinking it's like, I don't know, Seth Curry or I don't know. Some bench player, Cam Thomas, maybe, who's on a hot streak himself right now, but we're not going to go into that. I never would have expected it to be KD, and I saw that and I was devastated because I had been in New York for a year and I had not gone to a Nets game in the KD Kyrie era. So thank you, Brooklyn, for not trading KD that summer because I got to go to a game later on. But anyway, back to the Nets conversation. So KD asked for the trade. The Nets can't find a partner that's going to give them valuable assets that they want in return. KD says, okay, I'll come back, but I want you to fire head coach Steve Nash and GM Sean Marks. And Joe Tsai, the owner of the Nets, says, no thanks. I'm good. You're going to come back. And that's going to be the end of it. And they moved on toward progress for the year. And the 2022 season starts off a little poorly. Nash gets fired, which he should have been in the offseason, but Joe Tsai didn't want to give way to Kevin Durant. And Kyrie gets suspended. And this time it's for anti-Semitic promotion, or should I say a promotion of an anti-Semitic movie. And I'm not going to get into the merits of the movie or the anti-Semitic nature of it or what it means for Kyrie, but it was a problem. And it was a problem for the Nets. It was a problem for a team that operates in a district of the world that has a very, very high Jewish population in Brooklyn. And it was a horrible situation for the PR, for the team, and for Kyrie. So he gets suspended, eventually issues an apology, blah, blah, blah. But the Nets make some progress without Kyrie. Edmund Sumner steps up. Yuta Watanabe steps up. Royce O'Neal steps up. Nick Claxton takes a huge step up. And eventually Kyrie comes back, and they're still playing well. And then KD gets hurt. And that's where the crap hits the fan, if you will. And the Nets are hovering around 500, and Kyrie requests a trade because the Nets don't want to extend him to a full max. And keep in mind, this is now another issue. I already talked about the previous issues, whether it be the vaccine, whether it be going AWOL and ending up at his sister's birthday party, whether it be not playing due to the civil unrest from the Black Lives Matter movement, all of which have their own merits, right? I'm not saying Kyrie shouldn't have missed time for each of those things. You probably should tell your team when you're going AWOL and going to your sister's birthday party. But the other two, I can't, although I would have gotten vaccinated, I can't say that he should have gotten vaccinated. Well, I can say he should have gotten vaccinated, but I can't require him to get vaccinated. I don't think that that's something that society, would really succeed in. And he had the option to get vaccinated, and he didn't. That's his choice. And the civil unrest, I'm fully behind him not wanting to go to the bubble and various other motives he had during the Black Lives Matter movement. But there was a lot of issues that the Nets didn't feel his availability was at topmost priority for him, and they didn't want to give him a max. So he asked for the trade, and he gets traded to the Dallas Mavericks. Good for the Dallas Mavericks. I talked about this trade in my previous episode of the podcast, so go back and check that out, episode 54. And what that means for Dallas and Brooklyn. And I really like it for Dallas, but it could blow up in their face because they only have half a season of Kyrie, and they just traded some good depth for him. But anyway, the Kyrie trade to the Mavs. Mavericks received Kyrie Irving and Markieff Morris. By the way, this is the second trade in a row. This one with Markieff Morris and the previous one with Paul Millsap, where the Nets traded aging power forwards that I thought would have a bigger role on a one-year deal. But that's not really the point. And then the Nets, in return for Irving and Morris, get Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, 2029 first-round pick, and 2 second-round picks. So now we come to the question, is this a failure? So in summary, let's start from the top to the beginning, because I hear a lot of people say the Nets traded away Kyrie Irving and James Harden, and all they got back is Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Ben Simmons. And that's ridiculous. That's just ridiculous. Because in reality, and on top of that, they gave up all these picks, is what everyone says. In reality, they gave away. So this is what they didn't get back in return, because they started out, they gave away 3 first-round picks, right? And then in the James Harden trade, they got 2 back. In the Kyrie Irving trade, they got 1 back. So before they signed Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving in 2019 to now, this is the difference in these transactions. They gave away 2 swaps, because they originally gave away 4, but 2 weren't conveyed because the Nets were better than the Rockets. 2 swaps, 1 year Jared Allen, Karis LeVert, Taurean Prince, Rodion Kurucs, half a season of Paul Millsap, half a season of Markieff Morris. In return, they got 2 seconds, 1 year of Harden, 2 years of Kyrie, half a year of Andre Drummond, Ben Simmons, Kevin Durant, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Seth Curry. So signing them in terms of a full asset perspective was not a failure. I understand you want getting these 3 guys. You want to win a championship, at least one. You want them in multiple championships. And I thought they were going to win multiple championships as a Nets fan, if I'm being honest. I thought this was a super team, if I'm being honest. The reincarnation of the Heatles, LeBron James and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh in Miami. That's what I thought the Nets could have, except more offensively talented. And they didn't. They didn't have that, because the Heat had 3 personalities that meshed well, 3 players that meshed perfectly, beautifully, and 3 players that were willing to take sacrifices when needed, especially the third guy, Chris Bosh. And the Nets had 3 players that were selfish. And, I'm not necessarily saying they're bad guys, but they were selfish on the basketball court in a way. And although they played well offensively, they weren't a perfect fit. And their personalities were all over the place. And that's what caused this issue. So if we take it from before 2019, like if we just assumed that the Nets kept their current core, they re-signed D'Angelo Russell, they kept Jared Allen, Karis LeVert, Taurean Prince, they kept these young players and kept making runs and falling short, versus what they did now. They gave up, like I mentioned, 2 swaps, 1 year Jared Allen, Karis LeVert. I'm not including Taurean Prince, Rodion Kurucs, Paul Millsap, and Markieff Morris. So they gave up 1 year Jared Allen, Karis LeVert, and 2 swaps for 2 second-round picks, 1 year of Harden, 2 years of Kyrie. I'm going to take out the players that don't really matter a whole lot. Ben Simmons, Kevin Durant, Dorian Finney-Smith, Seth Curry. That's a huge success in terms of just asset perspective, because now you have an opportunity where Kevin Durant, if he's traded, gets you a huge amount of assets, and you've profited 7 picks and swaps over. But we'll get into that in a second. So the question is, do you consider this a failure because they didn't get rings? And if you said yes, I wouldn't hate it. And maybe I'm being a Nets apologist, but do I think it's a failure? Yes. Do I think it's the biggest failure in sports history? No, absolutely not. I think it was a decent attempt that failed due to injury and personalities not meshing well. But you had other situations, notably the Nets' own situation. Think back to when they traded for Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce. Not only did they get subpar talent, they wasted years and years and years from 2012 or 2013, whenever that trade happened, all the way until 2019 when they finally made the playoffs. that whole era was absolutely destroyed because they got awful talent and gave up lots of assets. And the Nets, in their current situation, have had decent talent, good talent, very good talent, really, and mediocre assets. Or now that they've traded that talent away, well, if assuming they trade KD in the offseason, they'll have not a lot of talent, but a good amount of assets. And so that's why this is not even the biggest failure in the last 15 years of the Nets organization. So I can't say it's the biggest failure in the history of sports. The Nets have Cam Thomas, Ben Simmons, Nick Claxton. They have talent on the team. And that doesn't even include the veteran talent that they could flip if they trade Kevin Durant, like Dorian Finney-Smith, like Royce O'Neal, like Joe Harris. So now we come to the conversation of whether KD will be traded in the offseason. Well, first of all, if he requests a trade, that hurts his value. And so there's a world where I could imagine the Nets have said to him in the offseason last year when he wanted to be traded, listen, give us one more year. Give us the rest of Kyrie's deal. We'll try to make it work. We'll try to win a championship, and we'll trade you in the offseason when your value's high. Because if he says, trade me, openly says, trade me, then the Nets don't have as much leverage because they got to trade him. Well, I guess they didn't because they didn't trade him last year, but they feel like they have to trade him, and other teams feel like they have to trade him, so they're not willing to give up as much. But the reality is the team as it's presently constructed, and there could be a trade down the market, right? I as of right now, I don't know if they've made any other trades, whether that's to get guys like Pascal Siakam or Zach LaVine, as Nets fans dream about, or whatever other trades could be down the road. The team as it's set right now is not going to win a championship. That's just fact. They're not beating Milwaukee. They're not beating Boston. They're not beating Golden State. They're not beating Denver. They're not beating Philly. But could they be? Could they trade for Pascal Siakam? Like let's assemble a package here with some of these firsts they got back. And Cam Thomas, now that his value's at an all-time high. And some salary filler. Maybe Ben Simmons. Maybe that's a deal that works out. And maybe one or two other assets that the Raptors really appreciate. And we have a situation where Pascal Siakam comes back and you start a lineup of Spencer Dinwiddie, Royce O'Neal, Dorian Finney-Smith, Kevin Durant, and Pascal Siakam. Well, I missed Nick Claxton in there. So maybe that's Dorian Finney-Smith coming off the bench. Maybe that's Spencer Dinwiddie, Royce O'Neal, Kevin Durant, Pascal Siakam, Nick Claxton, with guys like Dorian Finney-Smith coming off the bench. Guys like Joe Harris coming off the bench. It's not a deep team necessarily, but that's a team that could compete. And so they're not in a screwed position here, assuming they make another move by the trade deadline, which they might not, but they're not in a great situation, but they're in a situation that they could improve. Well, the question is, in the offseason, if they don't trade for a star, will the Nets be better moving on? Let me give you an idea of what a package for Kevin Durant could look like. A Blazers fan, actually, that I know suggested this. If the Blazers are set on trying to give Damian Lillard a chance to win a ring soon, Anthony Simons, Shaedon Sharpe, 2 firsts, 3 swaps for Kevin Durant. Now, all of a sudden, you're looking at a team that looks like Anthony Simons, Cam Thomas, Shaedon Sharpe, Ben Simmons, Nick Claxton as a starting 5. But I tell you what, that's a decent defensive team with Claxton, Simmons, and Sharpe. That's an incredible offensive team with Simons, with Thomas, the tear he's been on. Sharpe's a good offensive player, a high flyer. Same with Claxton. And Simmons, I mean, he can't be any worse than he's been. That's a team that has movable assets, that has picks, that's rebuilding, that has a solid young core, and that's ready to go and compete a few years down the line. So overall, do I think the Nets will trade Kevin Durant in the offseason? If I had to put money on it, I think he's getting traded in the offseason. Do I think that they're in a horrible situation? Absolutely not. They have 2 paths here. They have a path where they could trade for a star and try to please Kevin Durant this year. Or they have another path where they could sit where they're at and trade Kevin Durant in the offseason. And either way, I think either the present is very hopeful or the future is very bright. And so I can't consider this the biggest failure in sports to answer the previous question. But it's certainly a failure nonetheless. And I'm disappointed the Nets didn't get a ring out of it. And I think a lot of basketball fans are disappointed it didn't work out from a pure basketball perspective, although these three were fairly hated across the league, right? Kyrie for his antics in Boston and Cleveland, and James Harden for his antics in Houston, and Kevin Durant for joining and then eventually leaving Golden State. That's something before we close out this episode I wanted to mention. A lot of media narratives out there. Kevin Durant had it made in Golden State. Why did he leave for Brooklyn? Why did he tie his career to Kyrie Irving? Well, listen, there's this thing in life to these media heads, to guys like Stephen A. Smith. There's this thing in life called friendship. And when two guys are really close friends and they believe they could do something great together, like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving are, they'll try to do that together. People blamed Kevin Durant for going to Golden State in the first place. It was, what a snake, right? What a cupcake. What a snake for going to the team that just beat you, that just came back down 3-1 in the Western Conference Finals. You go to leave to join them. And him and Russell Westbrook have never had a good relationship since that point because that was viewed in such a negative light. And then Kevin Durant goes to Golden State and wins 2 titles. And there's always an asterisk with them, no matter if he's won finals MVPs in both of them. And so he decides to leave and move on to a team that he could build himself. A team where he's playing with his best friend or one of his best friends. And I think that's a great decision, just in a vacuum. And I know that Kyrie Irving had his own problems, and Kevin Durant probably should have known that, right? He probably should have known it from the earth is flat, from him promising to be loyal to each team he's been on so far. But he took a risk. He took a risk in partnering with a guy that he thought was all in, and he wasn't. But staying in Golden State, I think, does nothing for his legacy. If he wins a ring with Brooklyn, which I don't think is likely at all, but if he does, it boosts his legacy much more than if he won 3 more with Golden State, in my opinion. Because he takes a franchise that's had a history of bad moves in the last 15 years and turns them around and makes them a winner. And I don't know if he does that necessarily, obviously. I don't think he does that, but if he does, it'd be an incredible turnaround. I don't blame him for leaving Golden State, and I think blaming him is lazy, in all honesty. This was a very multifaceted episode of Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast. I hope you enjoyed the full totality of the conversation around LeBron, around KD, and the Nets. If you like this kind of content, you can click the links in the description, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on a podcast platform. There's links in the description, in the show notes, depending on how it's labeled. And there you can access all of our platforms: Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, the merchandise, the website, the newsletter, all via the links down there, or via the website, lotsofthoughts.godaddysite.com. If you're watching on YouTube, leave us a like. If you're listening on a podcast platform, rate us 5 stars. Thank you very much for watching or listening to this episode of Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast. Have a wonderful rest of your day.